Please remove the sack and buy me. That's what the pregnant widow whispered through burlap, her voice cutting through the winter wind. The crowd laughed, boots crunching on frozen dirt, until the giant Apache stepped forward. His shadow fell across the auction block, and every man's hand went to his gun belt. No one knew why he'd pay for her. No one knew what she carried, a secret worth more than cattle, more than gold, more than life. In this town, power belongs to the man who owns the water, and he's already marked her as his next prize. But the Apache knows the mountain pass, the hidden trails, the places a woman can vanish before snow seals the land. Trouble is, riders are already in the saddle, hunting her before the sun sets. Some say he's saving her. Others say he's sealing his own fate. Out here, a promise can save a soul, or cost every drop of blood you've got. Your reactions reaffirm something simple yet powerful, that stories still shape us, even in silence. If you believe in the soft endurance of love, truth, and doing what's right, then you're exactly why these stories exist. Clara Mae Redding stumbled as Dakota guided her away from the auction platform, her legs stiff from hours spent bound in that suffocating burlap sack. The December wind bit through her thin dress, making her shiver. Behind them, the market crowd's angry mutters grew louder, like hornets stirred from their nest. "Keep walking," Tokuda murmured, his grip gentle but firm on her elbow. His buckskin jacket brushed against her arm, warm from his body heat. "My horses are just past the mercantile." Clara nodded, fighting to keep her chin up despite the shame burning her cheeks. She could feel the townspeople's stares boring into her back. A woman who'd once served them bread at church socials, now sold like a piece of livestock. Her hand drifted to her swollen belly, protecting the child within. "Ain't right," a voice called out. "Apache buying white women now. Sheriff ought to be ashamed." Another added. Horace Wilkes's boots thudded on the wooden platform behind them. "Now see here, Dakota. You know as well as I do that this ain't proper. That woman's carrying a child that needs Christian raising." Dakota didn't slow his stride or turn around. "The auction was legal. I paid fair price. Legal don't make it. Right?" Wilkes's voice carried the oily smoothness that had convinced so many to sell him their land for a fraction of its worth. "Think of her reputation. Think of that baby's future. My offer still stands. I'll give you double what you paid." Clara's heart hammered. She'd heard whispers about conditions in Wilkes's mining camps where desperate women were put to work, in ways that had nothing to do with mining. She pressed closer to Tokuda's solid presence. "Not for sale," Tokuda replied. The words flat and final. They reached his horses to sturdy pintos ground-tied near the mercantile's back door. The closer one lifted its head, ears pricking forward at their approach. Clara noticed thick blankets rolled behind the saddles, provisions for winter travel. Shouts erupted behind them. Clara turned to see Sheriff Barlow hurrying toward them, hand resting on his gun belt. Two of Wilkes's ranch hands flanked him, their expressions ugly. "Hold up there," Barlow called. "There might be some paperwork needs reviewing before you ride." "Out." Dakota's face remained impassive, but Clara felt him tense. Papers were signed, witnessed by the clerk. "Well now, about that." Barlow tugged at his vest, trying to project authority. "Mr. Wilkes here has raised some valid concerns about the legality of selling a woman in her condition. Could be deemed endangerment of an unborn child." Clara's voice shook with fury as she spoke up. "You had no such concerns when you dragged me to that platform in a sack, Sheriff, nor when you let Horace Wilkes bid on me like a prized heifer." A small crowd had gathered, maintaining careful distance but eager for the drama. Clara recognized faces she'd known for years, women who'd shared recipes with her, men who'd tipped their hats in greeting. Now they watched her fate being decided. like it was a puppet show at a county fair. Now, Mrs. Redding, Wilkes stepped forward, all concern and courtesy. "We're only thinking of what's best. A woman alone, with child, it ain't safe. Especially not with—" He glanced meaningfully at Dakota. "I wasn't alone until you drove off every farmer who relied on my spring," Clara shot back. "Until you paid men to poison my cattle and burn my fences. Until you convinced the bank to call in my husband's loans barely a month after burying him." Wilkes's face darkened. "Those are serious accusations, ma'am. Best be careful what you say without proof. Enough." Dakota's quiet word cut through the tension. He turned to address the crowd directly, his English clear and precise. "This woman was sold legal by your law. Any who dispute it can take it up with the territorial judge." He helped Clara mount, then swung up behind her on the Pinto's broad back. The second horse's lead rope was already in his hand. Sheriff Barlow's hand tightened on his gun belt. "Now hold on, let them go." Wilkes's voice carried the false generosity of a man confident in his power. "For now, but remember what I said, Dakota. I'll be setting things right, one way or another." Tokata didn't respond, just clicked softly. To the horses. They moved out at a steady walk, heads high and alert. Clara kept her back straight, refusing to slump even as exhaustion and fear threatened to overwhelm her. The market crowd parted before them, faces a blur of judgment and curiosity. As they passed the last buildings of San Miguel, Clara finally spoke. "Where are we going?" "North Dakota," replied. "To winter camp in the high country. Safe there." "Why? Did you help me?" He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said, "Because no one should be sold like property. Because a child should be born free." Another pause. Then, "Because I saw how you shared your spring water with the Jacariella families last summer when others would have shot them for trespassing." Clara remembered those days, the small group of women and children, their faces drawn with thirst, their horses stumbling. She'd lowered her rifle and gestured them forward, knowing it would feed the rumors about her being Indian-loving trash. She hadn't expected anyone to notice, let alone remember. The winter wind moaned through the pines, carrying the promise of snow. Behind them, San Miguel dwindled, its church steeple stark against the gray sky. Clara shivered, and Dakota wordlessly draped one of the thick blankets around her shoulders. "They won't let this go," she said softly. "Wilkes never does." "No," Dakota agreed. "But neither do I." They rode on as the first snowflakes began to fall, two outcasts bound by necessity and an unexpected understanding, leaving whispers and threats in their wake. The livery stable loomed ahead, its weathered boards creaking in the winter wind. Dakota guided Clara along the icy street, one hand hovering near her elbow to steady her if she slipped. The few townspeople still out at this hour crossed to the other side, whispering behind gloved hands. "Watch your step here," Dakota said quietly, indicating the treacherous patch of ice before the stable's side door. The stairs leading to the room above were narrow and steep. Clara gripped the rail, her pregnant body making the climb awkward. Each step brought a fresh wave of exhaustion, but she refused to show weakness. The room was small but clean, warmed by a pot-bellied stove in the corner. A narrow cot lined one wall, while a rough-hewn table and two chairs occupied the center. The scents of hay and horses drifted up through the floorboards, mingling with the sharp bite of winter air sneaking through the window's loose seal. "Please, sit." Dakota gestured to one of the chairs. Clara lowered herself carefully, keeping her back straight and her hands folded in her lap. Her eyes tracked his movements as he moved about the room, but his manner remained calm and deliberate. From his saddlebags, Dakota produced a loaf of bread and a tin of coffee. He set them on the table, then stepped back to give her space. "You must be hungry." Clara's stomach clenched at the sight of food, but pride made her hesitate. "I don't need charity. Not charity," Dakota replied. Courtesy, between equals. He busied himself with the coffee pot, setting it to heat on the stove. The bread was fresh, still slightly warm from the baker's ovens. Clara tried to eat slowly, maintaining dignity, but hunger soon won out. When was the last time she'd had a proper meal? The sheriff hadn't bothered feeding her during the 2 days she'd spent in his jail. As darkness gathered outside, Dakota lit a single oil lamp. Its gentle glow cast long shadows on the walls. Neither spoke while Clara ate and sipped the strong coffee, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. Finally, Clara set down her cup and squared her shoulders. "You must be wondering why the sheriff had me up for auction," she said. Dakota settled into the other chair, his dark eyes steady. "If you wish to tell me." The lamp's flame wavered as Clara drew a deep breath. "My husband, Thomas, was a railroad surveyor. 6 months ago, there was an accident, a bridge collapse. They said it was rotten timber, but," she twisted her wedding ring. "Thomas had reported safety concerns about that bridge 3 times. Each time, the company ignored him." Dakota nodded slowly, understanding in his expression. After the funeral, everything changed. The bank called in our loans without warning. Neighbors who'd been friendly for years suddenly had no time for the widow of a troublemaker. Bitterness crept into her voice. Then Horace Wilkes started making offers for our land, insultingly low offers. When I refused to sell, strange things began happening. Fences cut in the night, a cattle found dead at the water trough. Messages left on my door warning me to see sense. Wilkes is known for such tactics," Dakota said quietly. Clara leaned forward, lowering her voice despite their solitude. "What Wilkes really wants, what the railroad wants too, is the high country spring Thomas discovered during his last survey. He knew it would be valuable, so he filed a claim in my name before that final trip." Her hand went to her throat, pulling out a leather cord. A folded paper hung from it, worn but intact. "The claim is legal, but I have to mark the boundaries and register improvements before the new year. If I don't, I lose all rights to it." Dakota's expression shifted slightly. "This spring, where exactly is it?" "In the Northwest Pass, near 3 tall pines that grow like sisters. Thomas said there was an old stone circle nearby. I know this place." Dakota's voice held new weight. "My people have used that spring for generations. It is sacred to us, protected by treaty." Clara's fingers tightened on the claim paper. "I didn't know. Few do. Few care." He studied her face. "What do you plan to do with it?" "Keep it free," Clara said firmly. "Available to all who need water, not locked away behind Wilkes's barbed wire or the railroad's greed." She met his gaze. "But I'll never reach it alone. Not with winter coming, not in my condition, and certainly not with Wilkes's men watching my every move." From below came the sharp slam of the livery doors. Dakota moved to the window, peering down at the street. 2 of Wilkes's ranch hands lounged in the shadows across the way, their cigarettes glowing like malevolent fireflies. "You are right," he said, drawing back from the window. "You cannot reach it alone." He turned to face her. "But perhaps we can reach it together." Clara sat straighter. "You would help me." "The spring must be protected. Your claim, properly registered, could prevent both Wilkes and the railroad from seizing it." He gestured to her belly. "But the journey will not be easy, especially for one carrying new life." "I'm stronger than I look," Clara said, chin lifting. "And I have no choice. Everything Thomas and I built, everything we dreamed of for our child's future, it all depends on reaching that spring before the snows close the pass." Dakota nodded slowly. "Then we must leave at first light, before Wilkes can gather more men or the sheriff invents new papers to stop us." He paused, then added, "There will be talk. A widow traveling with ... He let the words trail off. Let them talk, Clara said firmly. They've already taken my reputation. They won't take my land, too. Below, horses stamped in their stalls. The watchman's cigarettes traced lazy arcs through the darkness. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, Clara felt something she hadn't experienced since Thomas's death. Hope. A pact had been forged in that small room above the livery, an unlikely alliance between a desperate widow and a man the town feared and misjudged. Together, they would race winter itself to secure a future for both their peoples. The spring waited in the high country, its waters holding the key to survival. Justice, and perhaps something more Dawn painted the sky in shades of iron and pearl, bringing with it a cold that cut straight to the bone. Frost sparkled on every surface, making the world look like it had been dusted with crushed diamonds. Clara's breath came out in white puffs as she carefully wrapped Thomas's survey documents in oilcloth. Her fingers stiff despite her worn leather gloves. The livery stable was quiet, except for the soft nickering of horses and the occasional scrape of hooves against wooden stalls. Through the gaps in the weathered boards, Clara watched Dakota moving efficiently between the general store and the stable, his tall figure cutting through the morning mist. He'd left before first light to gather supplies, wanting to avoid drawing attention. Now he returned, his arms laden with bundles. The storekeeper was eager to be rid of me, he said, his tone matter-of-fact rather than bitter. He laid out their provisions on a hay bale, bags of flour and salt, thick wool blankets, and several boxes of cartridges for both their rifles. "How much do I owe you?" Claire asked, reaching for the small purse she'd managed to keep hidden during her arrest. Dakota shook his head. "Consider it my investment in the spring's future." He began distributing the supplies between 2 sets of saddlebags. His movements precise and practiced. Clara turned back to her task, securing the oilcloth, packaged with twine. These papers were everything: the deed, the survey maps, Thomas's detailed notes about the spring's location. Without them, they'd have no chance of proving her claim. A scuffing sound made them both turn. A boy of about 12 stood in the stable doorway, his clothes threadbare but clean. Jimmy, the livery owner's son, twisted his cap nervously in his hands. "Mr. Dakota," he whispered, glancing over his shoulder. "Pa sent me to tell you Wilkes's men rode out before dawn. 4 of them headed toward the mountains. They was carrying extra ammunition and supplies." Dakota's expression didn't change, but Clara saw his shoulders tense. He pulled a coin from his pocket and pressed it into Jimmy's hand. "Thank you, young friend. You've done well to warn us." The boy disappeared as quietly as he'd come. Dakota immediately began adjusting their preparations, his movements more urgent now. "We'll take the North Trail," he said, leading 2 horses from their stalls, a sturdy bay gelding for himself and a gentle-looking dun mare for Clara. "It's longer, but less traveled, harder to track." Clara approached her horse, trying to hide her apprehension. She'd ridden before, but not often, and never in such rough country. The mare turned her head, regarding Clara with a liquid brown eye. "Her name is Maple," Dakota said, adjusting the stirrups to accommodate Clara's condition. "She's steady and sure-footed. She'll take good care of you." With Toko's help, Clara mounted, settling herself as comfortably as possible. Her back already ached, and they hadn't even started. She straightened her spine, determined not to show weakness. They left town by the back ways, avoiding the main street where early risers were just beginning to stir. The North Trail wound through stands of pine and aspen, climbing steadily into increasingly rocky terrain. Clara focused on maintaining her seat, grateful for Maple's smooth gait. The day wore on, marked by the sun's slow arc across the pale winter sky. Clara's muscles protested the unaccustomed activity, and her lower back throbbed in time with each step. Still, she kept pace, refusing to be the one to call for rest. It was Dakota who finally reined in beside a frozen creek, the late afternoon shadows already lengthening around them. "We'll camp here," he said, noting Clara's barely concealed exhaustion. "There's shelter from the wind, and the trees will help hide our fire." Clara practically fell from the saddle, her legs trembling. Dakota steadied her with a strong hand, then set about making camp with quiet efficiency. Soon a small fire crackled, carefully screened to minimize its visibility, and the horses were hobbled nearby. The stars emerged one by one as they shared a simple meal of beans and journey bread. Clara pulled her blanket tighter, watching the fires dance. The silence between them felt comfortable now, like a bridge slowly being built. "May I ask you something?" she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Dakota looked up from where he was cleaning his rifle. "You may ask?" "The way you understood about my child, about wanting to protect their future, ... She hesitated. "Have you ... had a family?" His voice grew distant, his hands stilling on the rifle. "Yes, a wife. She was carrying our first child when the militia came." He spoke slowly, each word weighted with memory. "They said they were hunting raiders. They didn't stop to see that our camp was peaceful, that we had papers showing our right to be there." His eyes reflected the firelight. "I was away, hunting, when I returned." "I'm so sorry," Clara whispered. She wrapped her arms around her middle, her child stirring within as if sensing her distress. "I used to think hate would sustain me," Dakota continued. "But hate is like a poison. It kills the one who carries it." He met her eyes across the fire. "Now I try to protect what's worth saving instead." Clara looked down at her hands. "I need to confess something. Before I met you, I believed what people said about Apaches. I was afraid." Shame colored her voice. "I was so wrong. Fear comes from not knowing," Dakota said gently. "What matters is being willing to learn." Truth from lie. A coyote's lonely howl split the night, its wild voice echoing off the rocky slopes. Clara shivered, not from cold. Then came another sound, the distinctive creak of saddle leather, followed by the soft clink of metal on metal. Dakota's hand moved to his rifle, his body absolutely still. His eyes met Clara's, and he pressed one finger to his lips. Someone was out there in the darkness, watching, waiting. The fire popped, sending sparks spiraling upward toward the stars-scattered sky. Clara held her breath, straining to hear more movement in the shadows beyond there. Small circle of light. A gentle touch on Clara's shoulder startled her awake. The sky was still dark, stars fading as false dawn crept over the mountains. Dakota crouched beside her, finger to his lips. They broke camp in complete silence, every movement careful and deliberate. Clara's hands trembled with cold as she rolled her blanket, but she forced them steady, determined not to make a sound. Dakota scattered dirt over the fire's ashes, then brushed pine needles over their sleeping spots until no trace remained. Even the horses seemed to understand the need for quiet, their hooves barely making a sound as they set out on the trail. The weak winter sun had barely cleared the eastern peaks when the first snowflakes began to fall. They drifted down like tiny feathers, delicate and sparse at first. Clara pulled her wool shawl tighter, grateful for the extra blanket Dakota had insisted she wrap around her shoulders. The trail grew steeper with each passing hour. Clara's thighs burned from gripping the saddle, and her lower back ached fiercely. The cold worked its way through her layers of clothing, settling deep in her bones. Still, she kept her complaints to herself, focusing instead on following Dakota's lead. Near noon, Dakota reined in sharply, studying the ground. Clara guided Maple alongside his mount, following his gaze. There in the light dusting of snow were clear hoof prints, 3 sets, heading up the trail ahead of them. Wilkes's men. Clara whispered, her breath visible in the frigid air. Dakota nodded grimly. 3 of them, fresh tracks. He surveyed the surrounding terrain, then pointed to a barely visible gap between 2 rocky outcrops. There's a narrow canyon through there. It's not on any maps, but it leads to the mission. Mission? Clara asked as they turned off the main trail. San Miguel Mission. Reverend Hollis runs it, a good man who helps both settlers and native people. Dakota's voice held respect. We'll find shelter there, at least for tonight. Canyon was so narrow, their stirrups nearly scraped the walls. Clara fought down her claustrophobia, trusting Maple's sure footing as they picked their way through. The snow fell harder now, thick flakes coating their shoulders and the horses' manes. They emerged from the canyon in late afternoon. The mission stood before them, a simple wooden church with a few outbuildings, smoke rising from 2 chimneys. A cross adorned the peaked roof, dusted with fresh snow. The door opened as they approached, spilling warm lamplight onto the gathering. Dusk. Reverend Hollis hurried out to meet them, his silver hair catching the last of the daylight. He was older than Clara expected, but his movements were spry and his eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed spectacles. Dakota, my friend, he said warmly, then turned to Clara with genuine concern. Come in, come in. You look half-frozen, my dear. The mission's main room was warm and inviting, heated by a pot-bellied stove. The Reverend ushered Clara to a chair near the fire, while Dakota saw to the horses. Soon she had a bowl of hot stew in her hands, the savory smell making her mouth water. Eat up, Reverend Hollis encouraged. You're eating for 2, after all. His kind smile reminded Clara of her own father, gone these past 5 years. When Dakota returned, brushing snow from his shoulders, the Reverend's expression grew serious. I should warn you, Wilkes's influence reaches even here. He claims to be a benefactor of the mission, though his donations come with expectations of loyalty. Has he been here recently? Dakota asked, accepting his own bowl of stew. His men passed through yesterday, asking questions. Hollis sighed. I told them only what everyone knows, that you purchased Mrs. Redding's contract at auction. They seemed particularly interested in which direction you might be headed. Clara's hand instinctively went to her belly as the baby kicked, strong and insistent. The Reverend noticed the gesture and smiled gently. The kitchen needs tidying. If you'd like to help Martha, he suggested, referring to his housekeeper. Work makes the evening pass more quickly, and you'll be warmer moving about. Clara nodded gratefully, glad to be useful. In the kitchen, she found simple tasks soothing, washing dishes, kneading dough for tomorrow's bread, listening to Martha's quiet humming as they worked. Through the window, she could see Dakota on the chapel roof, helping patch holes with fresh shingles despite the snow. The sight of him working alongside the Reverend's handyman warmed something in her heart. Here was a man who paid his way with honest labor, who kept his word in all things. As darkness fell, they gathered again, by the fire. The Reverend poured cups of hot coffee, then cleared his throat. Dakota, I've been thinking. There's a hidden root cellar below the mission. We could keep Mrs. Redding safe there until spring, when the weather's better for traveling. Clara looked up sharply, but Dakota was already shaking his head. She must mark her claim before the new year, he explained. Every day of delay risks losing it entirely. His dark eyes met Clara's across the room. We've come too far to turn back now. Ah. Sudden thunder of hoofbeats outside made them all freeze. Through the window, dark shapes passed on the mission road riders, moving fast despite the snow. No one spoke until the sound had faded into the distance. Wilkes's men, the Reverend said quietly. They've been patrolling the road since yesterday. He looked worriedly at Clara. Are you certain you wouldn't rather wait? At least until the weather improves. Clara squared her shoulders, one hand resting on her belly. Thank you, Reverend, but Dakota's right. We have to press on. Everything depends on reaching that spring in time. The Reverend nodded slowly, understanding. In his eyes. Outside, the snow continued to fall, coating the world in pristine white that would make tracking all too easy. Come morning, dawn painted the eastern sky in pale watercolors as Clara and Dakota prepared to leave the mission. The fresh snow had transformed the world into a silent, white wilderness. Reverend Hollis pressed a small packet of dried herbs into Clara's hands. Mountain tea for warming the blood, he explained, and bid them Godspeed. The snow was deeper than expected, forcing them to dismount and lead their horses through the drifts. Clara's boots quickly soaked through despite the leather treatment Dakota had applied the night before. Her toes grew numb, but she pressed on, following in Dakota's tracks. The snow hides our trail, Dakota said quietly, breaking the morning silence, but it also slows us down. He glanced at the heavy clouds overhead, his expression concerned. By mid-morning, they found shelter in a hollow surrounded by towering pines. The trees' thick branches had kept some of the ground clear, creating a natural refuge. Clara sank gratefully onto a fallen log while Dakota checked the horses. She pulled out the bread Martha had packed for them. Along with strips of jerky, steam rose from their breaths as they ate, the only sound the soft dropping of snow from laden branches. Clara watched Dakota, noting how his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, alert to any movement. "Tell me about the spring," she said finally, wrapping her hands around a tin cup of hot tea. "What does it mean to your people?" Dakota was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes distant. "The waters there have healing powers," he said at last. "Our elders say it was a gift from the Creator, placed there when the world was young." He brushed snow from his sleeve. "Many have found healing there, both body and spirit. The treaties promised it would remain free for all people to use. Both our peoples have suffered from broken promises," Clara said softly. Dakota nodded. "The spring belongs to no one and everyone. Like the sun, like the rain." He looked at her intently. "Your husband understood this. Kames believed water rights should serve the community, not line the pockets of men like Wilkes." Clara's hand drifted to her belly, feeling the child move. He wanted to protect the spring, keep it open for all. She closed her eyes briefly, offering a silent prayer that they would succeed in honoring James's vision. They resumed their journey as the short winter day wore on. The snow had settled into a steady fall, thick flakes swirling in the bitter wind. Late afternoon found them cresting a high ridge. Clara caught her breath at the view. The valley below stretched away into the gathering dusk, bordered by jagged peaks. Tako raised his hand, pointing. There, through the falling snow, Clara saw a thin column of smoke rising from a cabin in the valley. Hope rose in her chest. Perhaps they could find shelter for the night. But Dakota's expression was wary. "Stay here," he instructed, leaving his horse with her. He moved forward on foot, rifle ready, disappearing into the swirling white. Clara waited, heart pounding, until he returned 15 minutes later. "The cabin's empty," he reported. "But someone was there recently. There was fighting." They approached carefully, leading the horses. As they drew closer, Clara saw what Dakota meant. The cabin door hung crooked on its hinges. Empty cartridge cases glinted in the snow, and dark stains marked the white drifts near the door. Inside, the cabin told its own story. Overturned furniture, a broken lantern, provisions scattered across the floor. But the stone fireplace was still warm, coals glowing beneath the ashes. "Whoever was here left in a hurry," Dakota said, examining marks on the doorframe. "No more than a few hours ago. Wilkes's men, perhaps, or someone running from them." He began gathering the scattered supplies, setting the cabin to rights. "We'll stay here tonight. The storm's getting worse." Clara helped him clean up while he got a fire going. The cabin was simple. One room with a rough plank floor, a table, 2 chairs, and a narrow bed pushed against the far wall. A shelf held mining tools and a few battered tin plates. They ate a spare supper of beans and coffee, sharing the single bed's thin mattress between them for sitting. The wind howled outside, rattling the window shutters. Clara found herself drawing closer to Toka's solid presence, grateful for his quiet strength. "I'll take first watch," he said, as full dark settled in. "Try to rest." Clara lay down, wrapped in her blankets, but sleep proved elusive. The cabin's shadows seemed alive with movement, and every creak of the settling logs made her start. Finally, exhaustion won out, and she drifted into an uneasy doze. She woke to Takota's hand on her shoulder, his finger pressed to his lips. Midnight had come and gone. The fire burned low. Through the window's clouded glass, a shadow passed, accompanied by the unmistakable crunch of footsteps in snow. Takote moved silently to the door, rifle ready. Clara's heart thundered in her chest as she eased herself up, one hand clutching her husband's old revolver. The footsteps circled the cabin, pausing at each window. Then, slowly, they moved away into the darkness. They waited, barely breathing, until the sound had faded completely. Even then, Tokode kept his rifle close, eyes fixed on the door. "Someone's tracking us," he whispered. "We'll leave before first light." Clara nodded, knowing sleep would not return this night. She stirred the fire's embers, adding a small log, and poured the last of their coffee. They sat close together in the flickering light, watching the windows and listening to the wind's mournful song. The crunch of footsteps grew closer to the cabin door. Takota raised his rifle, positioning himself between Clara and the entrance. A weak knock sounded, followed by a raspy voice. "Help, please, Takota and Clara exchanged glances. The voice held no threat, only desperation. After a moment's hesitation, Takota moved to the door, keeping his rifle ready. "Step back from the door," he commanded. When he heard shuffling compliance, he eased the door open. There, illuminated by the cabin's dim firelight, stood a man more ghost than human. His beard was thick with ice, his clothes frozen stiff. He swayed on his feet, eyes glazed with exhaustion. "Name's Matthews," he managed through chattering teeth. "Lost my gear, 3 days in the storm, Takota quickly pulled him inside. The man's hands were dangerously white with beginning frostbite. Clara was already hanging a pot of snow over the fire to melt for broth while Takota helped Matthews out of his frozen outer layers. "Trapper," Matthews explained as they eased him, close to the fire. "Got turned around when the weather changed. Lost my horse in a drift." His voice was barely above a whisper. Clara handed him a cup of hot broth, which he sipped gratefully. Color slowly returned to his face as warmth seeped back into his bones. His eyes moved between Takota and Clara, taking in their unusual partnership. "Much obliged," he said finally. "Reckon I'd have frozen solid out there." He hesitated, then added, "Been meaning to warn anybody I came across. Saw Wilkes's men yesterday, before the storm hit. They've split up, half taking the river trail to cut off anyone heading to the high country." Clara's hand instinctively went to her belly. "How many?" "6 total. 3 heading up each way." Matthews shook his head. "They're armed, heavy-looking." For someone specific like Takota's expression remained neutral, but Clara saw his fingers tighten on his rifle. They both knew what this meant. Their path ahead was even more dangerous than they'd thought. As soon as first light began to creep through the windows, Clara insisted they move on. The storm had lessened slightly, but dark clouds promised more snow to come. They left Matthews wrapped in spare blankets by the fire, sharing what food they could spare. "God keep you both," he said, as they departed. "Whatever you're running from, I hope you make it." They rode hard through the morning, pushing their horses as much as they dared through the deepening snow. The wind grew stronger with each passing. Hour-driving ice crystals that stung their faces like needles. By midday, the world had disappeared into a solid wall of white. "White out," Dakota shouted over the howling wind. Clara could barely see him, though he rode just ahead. The horses stumbled, confused by the blinding snow. They needed shelter fast. Dakota led them toward a looming shadow that gradually revealed itself to be a rocky cliff face. They followed it until they found an overhang deep enough to provide some protection from the deadly storm. The horses huddled together, grateful for the respite, while Dakota positioned himself to block most of the wind from Clara. She leaned against him, trembling from cold and exhaustion. Through his buckskin shirt, he felt the strong kick of her child. "The baby's restless," Clara said, managing a weak smile. "Doesn't like the cold any more than I do." Dakota wrapped his blanket around them both, sharing what warmth he could. They stayed that way for hours as the storm raged, speaking little, each lost in their own thoughts. Clara dozed fitfully against his chest while he remained vigilant, watching the swirling white for any sign of pursuit. As suddenly as it had begun, the storm passed. The setting sun broke through the clouds, transforming the snow-covered landscape into a dazzling spectacle. Moonlight took over as darkness fell, making the fresh snow glitter like scattered diamonds. "It's beautiful," Clara whispered, but her voice held worry. "Our tracks will be clear as day in this. We'll ride through the night," Dakota said. "The snow's firm enough now to hold the horses." They mounted up, leaving the shelter of the overhang. Their horses were tired but game-picking their way carefully through the moonlit drifts. The cold was intense, but the wind had died completely, leaving an ethereal silence broken only by the soft crunch of hooves in snow. They rode until the horses began to stumble, forcing them to stop near a frozen stream. The moon was setting now, and Clara's exhaustion was evident in every movement as she helped make camp. They didn't dare risk a fire, instead sharing the last of their jerky and huddling clothes for warmth. "Try to sleep," Tokuda told her softly. "I'll keep watch." Clara nodded, too tired to argue. She was asleep almost instantly, her breathing deep and even. Toko sat beside her, alert despite his own weariness. The night was absolutely still. Too still. Then he heard it. The distinctive metallic click of a rifle being cocked. Somewhere in the darkness beyond their camp, the rifle's click galvanized Dakota into action. His hand shot out, grabbing Clara's shoulder and yanking her down just as a thunderous report split the night. The bullet meant for them splintered a thick pine trunk, sending bark flying. "Stay down," Dakota commanded, positioning himself between Clara and the unseen threat. His own rifle came up smoothly as he scanned the darkness, looking for any movement. Another shot cracked out, this one going wide. Dakota tracked the muzzle flash and returned fire with careful precision, his shot causing a muffled curse from the shadows. Clara pressed herself flat against the frozen ground, one arm protectively curved around her belly. Her heart hammered so hard she could barely breathe. More shots exchanged in the darkness, the sound echoing off the surrounding hills. Dakota's measured response forced their attackers to stay back, unable to get a clear shot without exposing themselves. "They're trying to circle around," Dakota murmured, ejecting a spent cartridge. "Keep your head down." The firefight continued for what felt like hours, but was likely only minutes. Finally, the sound of retreating footsteps crunching through snow reached them, growing fainter until silence settled once more over the wilderness. Dakota maintained his vigil until the eastern sky began to lighten. Only then did he allow Clara to sit up, though he kept his rifle ready. In the gray dawn light, they examined the tracks left by their attackers. 2 men, Dakota said, studying the impressions in the snow. Heading back toward town. He pointed out details Clara would have missed, the depth of the prints showing the men were moving quickly. The occasional splash of blood indicating one had been wounded. Clara stood, watching the tracks disappear into the distance. Her face set with newfound determination. "I won't let them take me," she said quietly. "I won't end up in Wilkes's camp." Dakota nodded, understanding the steel in her voice. They broke camp quickly, loading their gear onto tired horses. The animals had recovered somewhat during their brief rest, but the day ahead would test their endurance. They rode hard through the morning, stopping only when necessary to rest the horses. The terrain grew steadily more challenging as they climbed, the trail switching back and forth across steep hillsides. By afternoon, clouds had rolled in, making the light flat and gray. Clara's back ached fiercely from hours in the saddle, but she didn't complain. The sun was setting when they finally reached the foot of the high pass. Massive peaks loomed above them, their snow-covered flanks turned pink and gold by the dying light. Dakota found them shelter in a deep gully, protected from the wind by steep walls. "We'll rest here tonight," he said, helping Clara dismount. "The horses need it, and so do you, and so do you." Clara couldn't argue, every muscle in her body screamed for rest. She watched as Dakota gathered wood and built a small fire, carefully shielding the flames to prevent the light from carrying far. The warmth was welcome after the bone-chilling cold of their ride. Dakota mixed flour and water in a tin plate, working it into a flat disk of dough. He set it to cook on a flat rock near the fire, the smell of baking bread soon filling their small camp. When it was done, he broke the bannock in half, sharing it with Clara. The simple food brought tears to her eyes as she remembered another meal months ago. "John's last morning," she said softly, the tears freezing on her cheeks. "He was so excited about the spring. Said we'd build a home there, raise our child where the water runs clear and sweet." She touched her belly gently. He never even knew about the baby. Dakota listened quietly, respect in his silence. When she finished, he spoke of what lay ahead. "The pass will be the hardest part of our journey," he said, his dark eyes serious. "The trail narrows 2 ledges barely wide enough for a horse. Ice makes every step treacherous. The wind up there can knock a man off his feet." He paused, making sure she understood. "Some parts we'll have to lead the horses and walk ourselves." Clara nodded, wiping her frozen tears away. "Then we'd best get what sleep we can." They settled close to the fire, sharing blankets for warmth. Dakota took first watch, his rifle across his knees as he studied the darkness beyond their shelter. The night was quiet, except for the occasional pop of burning wood and the soft breathing of the horses. Clara lay awake for a long time, one hand resting on her swollen belly, feeling her child move. The violence of the morning's attack had shaken her, but instead of fear, she felt a fierce resolve growing stronger with each passing hour. She would reach that spring. She would secure her child's future. And she would not let Horace Wilkes or anyone else stop her. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Narrow ledges, treacherous ice, bitter wind. But for now, in their sheltered gully with the fire's warmth holding back the worst of the cold, Clara allowed herself to rest. They had survived the day's dangers. Tomorrow would have to take care of itself. Morning arrived with a brutality that took Clara's breath away. The cold cut through her layers of clothing like knives, and the wind howled between the peaks with a sound like a wounded animal. Her fingers felt stiff and clumsy as she helped Dakota break camp, every movement requiring careful thought to avoid dropping their precious supplies. "We'll need to take it slow," Dakota said, his voice barely carrying over the wind. "The trail ahead is treacherous." He secured their packs with extra care, checking each strap twice. The horses stamped nervously, steam rising from their nostrils in the frigid air. The climb began at a crawl. Their horses picked their way carefully along the ascending trail, hooves sliding on patches of ice hidden beneath the snow. Clara watched as Tokota's mount tested each step before committing its weight, and she urged her own horse to follow the same path. The trail grew steadily narrower as they climbed higher. When it shrank to little more than a ledge cut into the mountainside, Tokota called a halt. "We walk from here," he said, helping Clara dismount. "Stay close to the wall." Clara's legs trembled as she took her first steps on the narrow path. The drop to her right seemed to go on forever, disappearing into swirling snow far below. Tokota took her hand in his grip warm and steady. "Small steps," he instructed. "Place your feet exactly where I place mine." They inched forward, leading their nervous horses. The wind tugged at their clothing and tried to steal their balance. Clara kept her eyes fixed on Tokota's boots, following his careful progress. His hand never left hers, providing an anchor of security in the dizzying height. When the path widened slightly near midday, they paused on a relatively flat ledge protected by an overhanging rock. Clara's legs shook with exhaustion, and she sank gratefully onto a boulder while Tokota checked the horses. "Look," he said suddenly, pointing across the valley. Clara followed his gesture and caught her breath. There, perhaps 2 miles distant, a delicate plume of steam rose from between snow-covered rocks. It hung in the cold air like a banner, barely visible against the gray sky but unmistakably real. "The spring," she whispered. Seeing it made everything more real. The brutal cold, the dangerous climb, the threats behind them. That rising steam represented everything they had fought for. Her child's future, Tokota's people's rights, a promise of healing waters free for all. They couldn't linger long in the bitter cold. After a brief rest and some hard bread shared between them, they resumed their careful progress. The afternoon brought fresh challenges as the wind grew stronger, carrying stinging particles of ice that felt like needles against any exposed skin. When darkness threatened, Tokota led them to a natural shelter formed by several massive boulders. The rocks broke the worst of the wind, creating a relatively calm space where they could make camp. Clara's entire body ached as she helped gather what little firewood they could find at this elevation. Tokota built a small fire, shielding it carefully to prevent the wind from stealing their precious warmth or the light from betraying their position. The dancing flames cast strange shadows on the rock walls of their shelter as they huddled close, sharing what warmth they could. "I want to teach you something," Tokota said, after they had eaten a meager supper of dried meat and the last of their bread. His voice was soft, but carried clearly in their protected space. A prayer of thanks to the Creator for giving us strength to endure. Clara watched as he demonstrated the graceful gestures that accompanied the words, his hands moving like birds in flight. Then he spoke the prayer slowly, letting her hear each syllable clearly. The Apache words were strange to her tongue, but she listened intently to their rhythm and flow. "Now you try," he encouraged. Clara repeated the words carefully, stumbling at first over the unfamiliar sounds. Tokota corrected her gently, and she tried again. On her third attempt, she managed to follow the cadence more smoothly, though she knew her pronunciation was far from perfect. "What does it mean?" she asked when she had finished. "It gives thanks for the strength to climb mountains," Tokota translated, his dark eyes reflecting the firelight. "For the wisdom to find safe paths, for the courage to face what lies ahead, and for the blessing of companions who share our journey." Clara felt tears prick at her eyes, touched by both the words and the gift of sharing this piece of his heritage. Before she could respond, a sound echoed across the darkness, the long, haunting call of a wolf. Another wolf answered from a different direction, their voices weaving together in the night air. Clara tensed instinctively, but something in Dakota's relaxed posture made her pause. The howls continued, creating an ethereal chorus that seemed to fill the vast spaces between the stars. "They're far away," Dakota assured her, noting her concern. "And they're not hunting, they're singing to each other, sharing news of their territory." He smiled slightly. "Some of my people say wolf songs are blessings from the spirits, reminding us we're never alone in the wilderness." Clara listened to the wolves with new ears. Instead of threatening, their songs now seemed almost comforting, a reminder that life continued even in these harsh heights. That they weren't the only creatures enduring the mountain's challenges. They banked the fire low for the night, preserving what would remain for morning. Clara wrapped herself tightly in her blankets, her muscles already anticipating tomorrow's ordeal. But the spring steam plume stayed fixed in her mind, a promise of journey's end, of hope fulfilled, of promises kept. The wolves sang intermittently through the night, their voices carrying messages she couldn't understand but could feel in her heart. As she drifted toward sleep, Clara whispered Dakota's prayer once more, the strange words now feeling like old friends on her tongue. Whatever tomorrow might bring, they had made it this far together, and the spring's promise waited. Ahead, the morning sun cast long shadows across the snow-covered slopes as Clara and Dakota resumed their journey. Their breath clouded in the crisp air, but the wind had mercifully died down overnight. The spring steam plume guided them like a beacon through the pristine wilderness. Clara's heart quickened with each careful step of her horse. The closer they drew, the more real it became, this dream that had sustained her through months of hardship. Dakota rode slightly ahead, his keen eyes scanning their surroundings for any sign of threat. "Almost there," he called back softly. "Another hour at most." The trail widened as they descended into a protected valley. Pine trees, their branches heavy with snow, stood sentinel along their path. Clara noticed Dakota's posture change as they entered the valley, a subtle straightening of his shoulders, a tilt of his head that spoke of reverence. "These waters have brought healing to my people for generations," he explained, sensing her observation. "Even in the deepest winter, they never freeze." As the sun climbed toward its zenith, they rounded a final bend. Clara caught her breath. At the sight before them, steam rose in graceful wisps from a series of pools nestled among snow-covered rocks. The water itself was crystal clear, with hints of turquoise in its depths. Even from a distance, she could see how it bubbled gently. From the earth, a constant renewal of life in the frozen landscape. They dismounted carefully, leading their horses the final distance. Clara's legs trembled, partly from exhaustion, but mostly from emotion. This place, this miraculous spring, represented everything she and her husband had dreamed of. Future. A home. A legacy for their child. Dakota helped her through the deep snow to the spring's edge. The warm vapor enveloped them, carrying a slight mineral scent. Clara knelt beside the nearest pool, tears welling in her eyes as she touched the warm water. It felt like a benediction on her cold fingers. "We need to place the claim stake," she said finally, wiping her eyes. From his saddlebag, Dakota produced the wooden stake they'd carried so far. Clara's husband had prepared it months ago, carving his initials and the claim number with careful precision. Together, they selected a spot where the stake would be visible but protected from the worst of the elements. The ground was frozen solid. But Dakota worked methodically with a small hammer, driving the stake deep enough to withstand winter storms. Clara unwrapped the oilcloth packet containing the precious claim documents. Her fingers traced her husband's signature one last time, before they tucked the packet securely into a natural crevice in the nearby rocks. The law required the documents to be stored on the claimed property. Another requirement met. "There," she whispered. "It's done." Dakota squeezed her shoulder gently. "Look," he said, gesturing to their left. Through the steam, she could make Out the solid shape of a cabin, set back among the pines. "The surveyor's shelter," she said. Her husband had mentioned it in his notes, a simple structure used by the railroad men during their work in the area. They led their horses to the cabin's small lean-to, which offered decent protection from the elements. The cabin itself was basic but sound, a single room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table, and a few shelves stocked with basic supplies left by previous occupants. Dakota soon had a fire crackling in the hearth while Clara took inventory of the shelves. She found dried beans, coffee, and even a few tins of preserved food. Welcome additions to their depleted supplies. The warmth of the fire gradually thawed their chilled fingers and toes. Clara sat close to the hearth, cradling a tin cup of hot coffee, while Dakota cleaned his rifle at the table. The domestic scene felt surprisingly natural, as if they'd shared this space for years rather than hours. As evening approached, painting the snow outside in shades of purple and gold, Clara found herself speaking of the future. "I want to build something here," she said softly. "Not just for my child, but for others. A place where the spring's waters can help anyone who needs healing just as they always have for your people." Dakota was quiet for a long moment, considering her words. "The Creator gave these waters to all people," he said finally. "But men like Wilkes would fence them off, sell them to the highest bidder." He met her eyes across the firelit room. "Your claim protects more than your future, Clara. It protects the spring's true purpose." The depth of understanding that passed between them in that moment needed no words. Clara felt it in her heart, a connection forged through shared hardship and shared purpose, through trust earned and faith kept. She saw in Dakota's eyes the same vision of peace she held in her own heart, a future where the spring remained. Free, where her child could grow up learning both his father's language and Dakota's prayers, where healing waters could wash away old prejudices and pain. The fire popped and sparked, sending shadows dancing across the cabin's walls. Outside, the spring steam rose steadily into the darkening sky, a constant reminder of the miracle they had fought to protect. Clara rested her hand on her swollen belly, feeling the child move within her. Hen knew with absolute certainty that they had found their way home. The first hints of dawn painted the eastern sky in pale gold when Dakota rose from his bedroll near the cabin's hearth. Clara still slept soundly, one hand resting protectively over her swollen belly. The fire had burned low during the night, leaving only glowing embers that did little to ward off the morning chill. Dakota pulled on his buckskin coat and checked his rifle before stepping outside. The world was hushed under its blanket of fresh snow, the spring steam rising like spirits in the dim light. Their horses nickered softly from the lean-to as he passed, heading toward a stand of dead pines he'd noticed the previous day. The dry wood would burn hot and clean. He worked methodically, breaking the smaller branches into manageable lengths and stacking them in his arms. The physical labor helped warm his muscles against the biting cold. A flock of snow buntings burst from a nearby thicket, startling him with their sudden movement. Something about their alarm raised the hair on the back of his neck. Dakota dropped the firewood and ran. The cabin came into view through the trees, and his heart clenched. The door hung askew, splintered near its hinges. Fresh tracks in the snow told the story clearly. At least 4 men had approached from downwind while he was away. Inside, the cabin was chaos. The table lay overturned, Clara's blankets scattered. The claim packet was gone from its hiding place in the rock crevice. Worst of all, Clara was nowhere to be seen. Fighting down his rising panic, Dakota read the signs with practiced eyes. No blood, they'd taken her alive, the tracks leading. A way showed she'd walked under her own power, though the irregular spacing suggested she'd been pushed along roughly. 4 sets of men's boots, 1 pair belonging to a heavier man, likely Wilkes himself. Dakota quickly gathered his essential gear: rifle, ammunition, water, and a handful of jerky. He checked that his knife was secure in its sheath. The tracks led downslope toward the valley they'd climbed through yesterday. Wilkes's men were moving fast but careless, leaving clear signs of their passage. The morning wore into afternoon as Dakota followed their trail. He moved swiftly but cautiously, knowing they might have left someone to watch their back trail. The kidnappers were heading for lower ground, probably aiming to make camp where the timber was thicker and the wind less brutal. Each time he found signs of them stopping to rest. His jaw clenched tighter. Clara's tracks showed she was tiring, stumbling more frequently. Once, he found an impression in the snow where she'd fallen. His fingers traced the outline, and he whispered a prayer to the Creator for her strength. The short winter day was fading when Dakota caught his first glimpse of firelight through the trees. He dropped to his belly in the snow, studying the situation carefully. The kidnappers had chosen a small meadow for their camp, ringed by dense pines. From his vantage point, on higher ground, he could see 4 men gathered around a growing campfire. Clara sat apart from them, her hands bound behind her back. Even from this distance, he could see she held herself proudly erect, refusing to show fear. Dakota recognized Wilkes's broad frame as the man paced near the fire, gesturing angrily. The wind shifted, carrying fragments of voices. ... Sign it over. Proper, Mrs. Redding, Wilkes was saying, and we'll see you safe back to town. Clara's reply was muffled but defiant. Wilkes stepped toward her threateningly, and Dakota's finger tightened on his rifle's trigger. But rushing in would be suicide. 4 armed men could cut him down before he reached her. He forced himself to think clearly, to plan. He studied each man carefully. 2 were trail-hardened cowboys, their rifles close at hand. The third was younger, nervous-looking, probably more used to town life than wilderness. Wilkes himself carried a polished revolver on his hip, but his soft hands and heavy breathing revealed his physical limitations. Dakota retreated silently through the deepening shadows, his mind working. A direct assault was impossible, but he had other advantages. He knew this country better than they did. He could move more quietly, survive with less shelter, and most importantly, they didn't know he was coming. Finding a sheltered hollow, Dakota settled in to wait for full darkness. He would need every advantage the night could offer. As he watched the last light fade from the sky, he touched the medicine pouch at his neck, asking the Creator for guidance. Clara's life and their shared dream of protecting the spring depended on what he did next. The sound of Clara's muffled cry carried to him on the wind, and his resolve hardened. Whatever it took, he would find a way to bring her home, to Dakota's. Mount thundered through the darkness, hooves striking sparks from the frozen ground. The horse was lathered despite the cold, its breath coming in great steaming clouds. He had pushed hard since leaving the meadow where Clara was held, knowing every minute counted. The mission's cross finally appeared against the star-strewn sky, a beacon in the wilderness. The stable doors creaked open at his approach. Inside, lamplights spilled across worn floorboards as Reverend Hollis emerged from his quarters, pulling on a wool coat. One look at Dakota's face told him everything he needed to know. "They have her?" the Reverend asked quietly. Dakota dismounted, his legs stiff from the punishing ride. Wilkes and 3 others. They took the claim papers too. His voice was rough with exhaustion and worry. "They're holding her at their camp, but they'll move at first light." Hollis nodded. Grimly, "Come inside. There's something you should know." He led Dakota to the mission's small kitchen, where the remains of a fire still glowed in the hearth. 2 days ago, 2 men arrived seeking shelter. Former Army Scouts brothers named Jeb and Thomas Raleigh. They've been watching Wilkes's operation, gathering evidence of his dealings. As if summoned by their names, 2 figures appeared in the doorway. They were lean, weathered men wearing cavalry-style boots and carrying well-maintained Winchester rifles. The taller one, Jeb, gave Dakota a respectful nod. "We've heard of you," he said simply. "Word travels about a man who stands against Wilkes." His brother Thomas stepped forward. "We left the army after seeing too many broken treaties. Too many good people hurt by men like him. We've been tracking his operation for months." Dakota studied them carefully. Their eyes held the steady look of men who had seen both combat and injustice. More importantly, they carried themselves with the quiet confidence of experienced fighters. "Clara's with child," Dakota said, "and the temperature's dropping." "Then we'd best not waste time," Hollis replied. He moved to a locked cabinet and withdrew several items: boxes of ammunition, medical supplies, and a coiled length of sturdy rope. The brothers quickly gathered their gear, while Dakota described the layout of Wilkes's camp. Thomas sketched a rough map in the hearth ashes as they planned their approach. Within 15 minutes, they were ready to ride. "God go with you," Hollis said softly as they mounted up. Fresh snow had begun to fall, the flakes catching the lamplight. Like falling stars, they rode single file through the darkness, following Dakota's lead. The brothers proved to be skilled horsemen, keeping pace without unnecessary noise. The snow grew heavier as they climbed, muffling their passage, but making navigation more challenging. Dakota relied on his intimate knowledge of the terrain, reading the landscape by starlight and memory. Near midnight, they passed the remains of the cabin where he and Clara had sheltered days before. The sight stopped them cold. Where the sturdy log structure had stood, only charred timbers remained, still smoking faintly in the snow. The destruction was complete and deliberate. "Wilkes's work," Jeb said quietly. "We've seen it before. Burns out homesteaders who won't sell, destroys anything that might shelter those who oppose him." Dakota's hand tightened on his reins. The burned cabin was more than simple vandalism. It was a message. Wilkes sought to own not just the land, but the very possibility of shelter and survival upon it. The spring, the mission, Clara's dream of a home, all were threats to his desire for total control. Thomas urged his horse alongside Dakota's. "We've got about 4 hours until dawn," he said. "How far to his ranch?" 2 hours at this pace," Dakota replied. "But we're not going to the ranch, not yet." Key pointed toward a ridge to the east. "There's a trail up there that gives a clear view of his entire operation. We need to know what we're riding into." The brothers exchanged glances, then nodded. They understood the value of proper reconnaissance. As they rode on, the snow continued to fall, erasing their tracks behind them. The weather would work both for and against them, providing cover, but making their approach more treacherous. Dakota led them up a winding deer trail to the ridgeline. From there, they could see the lights of Wilkes's ranch complex spread out. Below, the main house, bunkhouse, stables, and various outbuildings. Several guards were visible, making regular patrols despite the weather. "He's expecting trouble," Jeb observed, studying the scene through a small spyglass. "More men than usual for this time of night." "How many total?" Dakota asked. "I count 8, maybe 10, Thomas replied. "But they're alert, professional. These aren't regular ranch hands, they're hired guns." Dakota absorbed this information silently. The odds were worse than he'd hoped, but better than he'd feared. More importantly, they had the advantage of surprise and knowledge of the terrain. He shared his developing plan with the brothers, who offered tactical refinements based on their military experience, as they prepared to descend toward the ranch. Thomas paused to check his rifle one final time. "You know," he said quietly, "we've seen a lot of men like Wilkes in our time. They think they're building something, but all they know how to do is destroy." Jeb nodded in agreement. "That's why we're here. Sometimes you have to stand with those who actually want to build something worth keeping." Dakota looked at these unexpected allies, the former soldiers who had chosen to fight for justice rather than power. The snow fell steadily around them as they began their careful descent. Each man knowing the desperate nature of their mission, but determined to see it through. They would need every bit of skill and courage they possessed to free Clara and stop Wilkes before his destruction spread further across this troubled land. The moonless night wrapped the ranch in shadows as Dakota led the Raleigh brothers through the snow. They moved like ghosts between buildings, their boots silent on the frozen ground. The main barn loomed ahead, its weathered boards silvered by starlight. A single lantern burned in an upper window, the hayloft where Clara was being held. Jeb touched Dakota's arm, pointing to a guard pacing near the barn doors. The man's breath formed white clouds in the frigid air as he stamped his feet to stay warm. Thomas circled wide to the left, while Dakota and Jeb crept right, surrounding there. Target the guard never saw Thomas coming. A quick blow from behind dropped him without a sound. They dragged his unconscious form behind a water trough, then slipped inside the barn's dark interior. The smell of hay and horses filled the space. Above, floorboards creaked softly. 3 men up there with her, Dakota whispered, counting the shadows moving across gaps in the loft floor. They found the ladder and began climbing one by one, weapons ready. The loft was warm and musty. Moonlight filtered through gaps in the roof, catching dust motes in silver beams. Clara sat bound to a support post, her face pale but determined. 2 men played cards by lantern light, while a third dozed in the hay. None noticed the silent arrivals until it was too late. Dakota's first shot caught the sleeping guard in the shoulder as he reached for his gun. The Raleigh brothers burst from the shadows, rifles raised. "Don't move," Jeb commanded. But the guard at the card table kicked over the lantern as he dove for cover. The glass shattered, spilling kerosene across dry straw. Flames erupted with a hungry roar. "Clara!" Dakota lunged toward her through the spreading fire. Gunshots cracked in the confined space. One of Wilkes's men screamed as Thomas's bullet found him. The other fled down the ladder, shouting in alarm. Dakota slashed through Clara's ropes with his knife. She stumbled as she tried to stand, her legs numb from being bound. The fire was spreading fast, eating through decades of dust and dried hay. Smoke billowed up, thick and choking. "This way," Jeb called, gesturing toward a side door he'd spotted. But a burning beam crashed down, blocking their path. The heat was intense now, making the air shimmer. Clara coughed violently, doubling over. Dakota pulled her close, shielding her from the worst of the smoke with his body. The roof creaked ominously above them. "Hold on to me," he shouted over the fire's roar. She nodded, gripping his shirt. Thomas appeared through the haze, pointing to another door. "There's our way out." They ran for it as more beams gave way behind them. The smoke was blinding now, stinging their eyes and burning their lungs. Clara stumbled again, but Dakota kept her upright, half carrying her the last few steps. The door was stuck, swollen shut from years of weather. Jeb and Thomas slammed their shoulders against it together. The wood splintered, then burst outward. They tumbled into the blessed cold night air, but their escape hadn't gone unnoticed. Wilkes's voice cut through the chaos. "There they are. Shoot them." Gunfire erupted from multiple directions. Cutes thudded into the barn wall as they scrambled for cover. Dakota pulled Clara behind a woodpile while the Raleigh brothers provided covering fire. "Kill them all," Wilkes bellowed from somewhere in the darkness. "But bring me those claim papers." The barn was fully engulfed now, casting wild shadows across the snowy ground. The heat was intense enough to feel even at a distance. Horses screamed in their stalls below, adding to the pandemonium. Thomas dropped another of Wilkes's men with a careful shot. "We need to move," he called. That fire's going to draw every ranch hand for miles. Dakota checked Clara's face in the firelight. She was pale but alert, her eyes fierce with determination. "Can you run?" A.T. asked. She nodded, pushing damp hair from her face. "Just don't let go of my hand." More bullets kicked up snow around them. Jeb fired back, forcing their attackers to duck. "Now," he shouted, "head for the trees." They broke from cover together, running hard through knee-deep snow. Clara's grip was strong in Dakota's hand as they fled. Behind them, Wilkes's voice rose again. "Shoot them in the legs. Don't let them escape." A bullet clipped Dakota's sleeve. Another struck the ground at Clara's feet, but they kept running, the Raleigh brothers guarding their flanks. The darkness between the trees beckoned, promising safety if they could just reach it. The sound of hooves pounding through snow grew louder, more of Wilkes's men approaching. The barn fire painted the world in shades of orange and red, transforming the peaceful ranch into a scene from hell itself. Smoke rolled across the ground like fog, making it hard to see where their pursuers were. But Dakota knew these woods, knew them better than any of Wilkes's hired guns. He led them up a game trail, too narrow for horses, forcing their mounted pursuers to dismount if they wanted to follow. The sounds of chase grew fainter as they climbed higher into the protective darkness of the forest. Clara's breathing was labored from the smoke and exertion, but she never faltered. They moved as one through the trees, her trust in his guidance absolute. Behind them, the barn collapsed with a thunderous crash, sending a column of sparks spiraling into the night sky. Dawn painted the eastern sky in pale gold as hoofbeats approached the smoldering remains of Wilkes's barn. Reverend Hollis rode at the front, his usually gentle face set with determination. Sheriff Barlow followed, looking uncomfortable as he surveyed the destruction. Behind them, a small posse of townsmen served as witnesses. Dakota and Clara emerged from their shelter in the tree line, the Raleigh brothers flanking them protectively. Clara's dress was smoke-stained, her hair wild, but she stood tall despite her exhaustion. The morning air was bitter cold, turning their breath to frost. "Good Lord," Reverend Hollis breathed, dismounting quickly. "Is anyone hurt?" "Just scratches and burns," Dakota answered, his voice hoarse from smoke. "But Wilkes and his men tried to kill us all." The sheriff shifted in his saddle, unable to meet Clara's steady gaze. "That's a serious accusation requiring proof." "I have proof enough," Clara said, her voice carrying across the yard. "He kidnapped me, stole my legal claim papers, and ordered his men to shoot us down like dogs." As if summoned by her words, Horace Wilkes strode from his house, buckling his gun belt. "These trespassers burned my barn. I demand their arrest, Sheriff." The Raleigh brothers raised their rifles slightly, but Reverend Hollis stepped between the groups, hands raised. "Let's settle this properly. Clara, you say your claim to the spring was legally marked." "It was," she answered firmly. "The stake is there now, with the date and my signature, witnessed by Dakota. The papers were in my possession until Wilkes's men stole them." Sheriff Barlow cleared his throat. "If the claim was properly marked before year's end, it's legally binding. Those papers would prove it." "Search him," Dakota said, pointing at Wilkes, the packets in his coat. The sheriff hesitated, looking between Wilkes's thunderous face and the waiting witnesses. Finally, duty won out. "Mr. Wilkes, I'll need to see what's in your pockets." "This is outrageous." Wilkes sputtered, but the sheriff, emboldened by the watching crowd, stepped forward. "Now, sir?" With clear reluctance, Wilkes reached into his coat. The oilcloth packet emerged, Clara's husband's careful handwriting visible on its surface. The sheriff examined the documents inside, nodding slowly. "The claim is legal," he announced, "marked and witnessed before the deadline." He handed the packet to Clara, who clutched it to her chest. Furthermore, Reverend Hollis added, I have 3 witnesses to attempted murder, kidnapping, and theft. Sheriff, you must do your duty. Barlow's face was pinched, but he nodded. Horace Wilkes, you're under arrest. He turned to his deputies. Take him in. As they moved to secure Wilkes, Clara began trembling, the full weight of events catching up to her. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she turned to Dakota. Thank you, she whispered, for everything, for believing in me when no one else would. Dakota's eyes softened as he looked at her. You proved yourself worthy of belief many times over. Reverend Hollis approached with a document he'd drawn from his saddlebag. I took the liberty of drafting an agreement, he said, declaring the spring shared land between Clara's homestead and 2 Coda's people, if you're both willing to sign. Clara studied the carefully written words. The spring should be free for all, just as it was meant to be, she said. I'll sign. As they formalized the agreement, Sheriff Barlow watched the proceedings with visible discomfort. The shame of the auction and his role in Wilkes's schemes weighed heavily. Within a week, word spread through San Miguel that he had resigned his post. The morning sun climbed higher. Melting frost from the burned barns remains. Clara looked out over the ranch, then toward the distant mountains where the spring waited. There's much work ahead, she said softly. But not alone, Dakota replied, standing beside her as Wilkes was led away in chains, his threats fading into the morning air. The spring would flow freely now, its waters bringing life to all who came in peace. Reverend Hollis smiled as he rolled up the signed agreement. Justice, so rare on the frontier, had prevailed this day. The sacred waters would remain as the Creator intended, a gift shared by all. Spring came softly to the mountains that year. The first wildflowers dotted the meadows around the spring as melting snow-fed crystal streams that tumbled down rocky slopes. Inside the cabin, Clara's labor pains had started before dawn. Dakota kept the fire stoked, bringing fresh water and clean cloths while the midwife worked. Morning light streamed through the windows when the first cry echoed off the log walls. Clara's exhausted smile lit the room as the midwife wrapped her newborn son in a soft blanket. Dakota, Clara called softly, her voice tired but steady. Would you hold him first? He approached carefully, his strong hands gentle as she placed the infant in his arms. The boy's dark eyes opened, studying Dakota's face with that ancient wisdom all newborns seem to possess. Outside, voices carried on the spring breeze. Settlers and Apache gathered to welcome the new life, sharing fresh bread and coffee from iron pots bubbling over campfires. Someone started singing a hymn, soon joined by traditional Apache songs of blessing. The mingled voices rose like prayer smoke toward the snow-capped peaks. Clear water rushed in the streambed, carrying winter's last ice away downstream. Clara watched Dakota holding her son, remembering that desperate winter day that seemed so long ago now. That day at the auction, she said quietly, "You didn't just buy me, you saved my life." Dakota smiled, touching the infant's tiny hand with one careful finger. Behind them, through the cabin's window, the mountains rose against the morning sky, eternal guardians of the sacred spring where 2 peoples had found peace. The child gurgled softly, grasping Dakota's finger with surprising strength, as if sealing their bond with his own small blessing. Thank you for watching. If this one reached you, consider subscribing. I'll be back tomorrow with more meaning, more humanity.